Okay, so for your rough draft, again, at this point, basically rough draft, the rest of the paper is kind of the English part of just writing out your interpretations and conclusions and validity. So we need to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of validity. The rest of the rubric is this, right? Criterion D um, is interpretation of results. So a zero, don't even think about a zero. A one would be a project contains at least one interpretation or conclusion. Two is contains interpretation or conclusions that are consistent with the processes used. And then from two to a three, that's really the biggest jump again, the hardest jump on in the rubric to get from a two to three in this criterion is a meaningful discussion of interpretations and conclusions that are consistent with mathematical processes used. Right? So you can see a little bit more detail here, but at this point, if you're making interpretations, attempting to, you should have no issue really to get up here into the two range. For criterion E, it's validity. So validity is referring to did the statistical tests that you do, were they valid as a to make an interpretation on what you're trying to find? So if you were trying to find is there a relationship of independence, it would be valid to use a chi-squared test. The other thing that you can talk about here is recognition of any limitations. So if you use a chi-squared test and your expected values are less than 5, you had to rearrange your table and redo your test. This is a good place to talk about that, right? So talk about what you had to do to make sure your test was going to be valid. Right? The almost last criterion, structured communication. Think of this as more the kind of traditional English, what you're looking for. There's structure to the project, right? For two, the project has been structured in a logical manner, right? So that means simple first, right? Simple first, then further. And again, that is on the outline, that is on that blue half sheet. I can't say that enough, apparently. You've got to do your simple first and then your further. Otherwise, it is not logical. And then well-structured in accordance with stated plan and is communicated in a coherent manner. So this is one of those times where as you continue working on the project, you need to make sure whatever you said you were going to do in your plan is what's in your project. If you didn't end up doing something, then just delete it from your plan. You need to get rid of it in your plan. The last thing is notation and terminology. This would be the math grammar part of this. You need to make sure you're using correct notation and terminology. That means if you are talking about chi-squared, you are talking about independence. You do not do a chi-squared test to test correlation. So if you're doing chi-squared, you are testing for independence. If you are doing Pearson's product moment correlation coefficient, then yes, you are trying to determine the relationship of correlation. Okay? You've got to keep those straight. And then I'll have some other examples of what the notation parts of this are. So notation and notation. Okay? Here's a general outline. This is linked on Canvas as well. The project outline, this is basically what I had you type into your Google Doc to begin with. But again, at this point, you're really down here, right? You did your mathematical processes where you're working on them still. It's this part right here that is kind of the rest of your project, the conclusion, validity. After every simple process, you should be making an interpretation. So all of your writing doesn't come into the conclusion. You should be doing interpretations as you go. And then in your conclusion, you're tying all of it together. What does it all mean together? What does it all tell you together? Okay. So validity in general, this idea of validity, here's the example I like to use. A scale that is 5 pounds off is reliable, but not valid, right? So you can run a test on something and make a conclusion, but if that test is not testing what you intended or what you said you were going to test, then it's not valid. So again, the difference between validity and reliable, the test can be reliable, but just not valid for what you're trying to investigate. Okay. If you think back to our cell phone data, the data we measured at the beginning of the year, think about, we talked a little bit about, okay, so what were things that were unreliable, right? From person to person. We might have done some things different. We might have counted SUVs in a different category, or some things in SUVs and some things in the truck category. And then think about, we did talk about chi-squared, and if we were intending to investigate the relationship of independence between vehicle type and cell phone use, then yes, validity, right? So that would be a valid test to test independence. Okay? This is from the project checklist that I gave you way at the beginning, but now is a good time to go back and start checking off these boxes here. So for these upcoming criterion for the rough draft, interpretation of results, did you produce at least two conclusions based on your processes? Did you make at least two interpretations? Did I discuss how I interpreted the results of my mathematical processes? These are check marks that you want to hit as many of these as you can, okay? And that will help you score better on the actual rubric. Okay, and then here is the place where I want to show you some examples of notation, mathematical notation. This is calculator notation. That's not appropriate for your project. You would need to do this. That would be written in your project as 34.56 times 10 to the power of 2. You need to type that in actual notation. And then the other big one is, this is a capital X. That is not the same thing as a chi-squared symbol. You need to make sure you're using the correct symbol. And you can find those either by Google searching or equation editor in Google Docs, which I don't have that slide apparently on this. In Google Docs, you can insert equations, and you should be able to find this chi-squared symbol or chi-squared chi symbol to make it appropriate. So if you're not sure about that, that can be one of the last things that you do kind of for your final draft, is going through and making sure your notation is appropriate. But just be aware that is something you need to look at. Okay. So there are a lot of resources on Canvas under the Tuesday, Wednesday area of the homepage. So go back and take a look at those, and especially I did post a second sample project from Goshen High School from last year, and that is a good example of not only just the mathematical processes, but the interpretations and the formatting and all basically the rest of the project. So use those to help guide you, and just get as much done for your rough draft as you can. Getting that peer evaluated is going to give you some valuable feedback.